Hey, good day, Fearless Schools podcast listeners. How are you doing? This is Dr. Drew Tomlin, your humble host, greeting you on a special Fearless Schools podcast, a best of 2025 review and reflection show brought to you by the wonderfully gracious folks at Creative Leadership Solutions. And as always, I'm joined by the equally wonderful Director of Professional Learning for CLS, Dr. Ann McCarty. How's everything with you, Dr. Ann?
Best of 2025, Drew Tomlin.
There you go. I can't wait to get this show going. This is something I've really been looking forward to quite a bit. And listening audience, no matter who you are, where you are, when you're listening to today's podcast, I hope you're doing well and enjoying a spirited day with plenty of good stuff in your life and your community. And we're happy that you're making the podcast part of that fun stuff. So there you are. There you have it. Here we go. Dr. Ann, listen, what are you hoping for today's conversation? What do you think?
My hope is that our listeners, if they haven't listened to all of our episodes, think to themselves, ooh, I want to hear that episode.
Yeah, exactly. Same here. And just in preparation for this podcast, it made me, go back and look at I know we're going to get into kind of like by the numbers type of situation, but we've done a lot of podcasts I had kind of not forgotten about, but just like, wow, we've started small and just kept on growing and growing. And so I hope out of this conversation that, reflection is a tool that we often talk about and for educational leaders. And so it's cool that we're taking that moment to reflect ourselves and so celebrate, a job well done. Question mark? I don't know. But yeah, let's so do you want to start with the numbers? I'm just kind of curious, like how
I can.
Okay, go for it, Dr. Ang.
Let's do it. Well, I think the important thing to know is that we have been listened to in about 30 different countries.
Oh my gosh.
Obviously right here in the United States, but then some of our far away reaching places include Saudi Arabia, Norway, the Russian Federation, France, Malaysia.
Ooh. Why do you think we have like a global reach? Like, why are people interested in what we're talking about, even if it's in different...
Because in the words of you, Drew Tomlin, it would be some awesome sauce.
There you go.
For our friends in the United States here, our most highly listened to state, California.
Hey, California. That's where I was born, California. Thank you.
Quickly followed by Ohio, which
Nice.
I attribute that to the fact that you and I are both from the round on the sides and high in the middle. And then our third is Texas.
Ooh.
So maybe that's Josh.
Maybe that is Josh Tovar. Yep. That is definitely his geography, his domain. That is cool. Well, big ups to California, Ohio, and Texas. And we know that every one of the states in the United States, they want to get on board with the Fearless Schools. And yeah, gosh, our global community, thank you for, geography and time zones shouldn't matter when it comes to great podcast listening. So
That's right.
That's really nice. That's super cool.
So here's no surprise. Our most downloaded episode was our episode with John Hattie.
I heard of that guy. Yeah.
He's this researcher. He's kind of famous.
We like to help our smaller, lesser known guys out there.
That's right. And then that is our number 2 spot, most listened to, and this is no surprise as well, is our first episode with Dr. Reeves on getting grading unstuck.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, so I put that on my list as one of the highlights for this whole podcast season 1. For a couple different reasons. One was because it was the first one and it was like, oh my gosh, we're really doing this. And I've known Dr. Doug Reeves' work. And so just getting able to talk to him and see where his mind is about grading was so super cool. And then, the fact that people really listened to it, like that was, I don't want to say shocking, but it was like, oh my gosh, like this is really happening.
Well, it was that particular episode. My dad, Drew, who was a plumber.
Yeah.
Listened to it and he's like, he makes a lot of sense. Like, how come my teachers didn't do that?
And
so I kept sending him more episodes, and then he listened to Dave Burgess, and he's like, where was this guy when I was in school? I was like,
oh my gosh.
If only we could all be that lucky.
Well, so the Fearless Schools podcast, helping plumbers across the world as well. Look at that. We didn't know we were going to reach that audience.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And then I think also our most people where they grab it the most is on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, really? Okay. That's very nice. I'm an Amazon Music listener. I mean, no offense to Apple. So for those of you who get it off of Amazon, good for you there too. Yeah, I mean, besides the very first episode with Reeves and Metzger about grading, were there any other highlights that you were like, oh my gosh, like this is so super cool?
I was thinking as we were approaching this, especially after I listened to John Hattie.
Yeah.
I've got to go back and listen to Anthony Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
Because the one my huge takeaway from Hattie's was the whole listening aspect. So of course I purchased his book immediately after listening to it.
Of course.
But that was one of the big things that Anthony Muhammad taught to. Remember, Drew, he kind of blew your mind because he's like,
yeah,
I had to know every 8th grader and I had to know something, like he had to know something about them by listening to them. And I'm like, ooh, connection here.
Yep.
Connection.
Yeah. Tell me who you are, but not your name. That's what you're called. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to listen. We have to listen to kids. What about you? Like where's it rolling around for you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, there were a lot of, Hattie, of course, big one there when you just think about somebody whose work you've read and admired and you understand the impact on that, and literally held staff meetings talking about his work, and then you get to talk to the guy. And then the fact that he picked up this is prior to the recording, but he was drinking coffee or something out of a New York Yankees mug.
Right.
And it sparked a conversation of what other kind of work, why are you a baseball fan? How does that work? And then he mentioned how he also does some educational coaching with actual coaches.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that meant the broad ranging effect of his work beyond education, so that's one thing. And then Jessica Flores, I liked her origin story about how her original interest and career was more about biology and wildlife and all that kind of stuff, but she was able to synthesize that work into her work with Creative Leadership Solutions as an educational, specialist and just awesome person. To go back to the listening thing, her quote that just continues to resonate all inside me is, "It whispers before it screams." I mean, the moment when she's talking about educational issues or problems going on in your school or challenges, that you have to really listen to and keep your ears really fine tuned, because typically those issues whisper before they scream. Oh, so yeah, that one, I got to thank Jessica for that one. That was a mic drop moment for me.
Mic drop.
Yep.
I think our conversation with Kim Marshall,
mm-hmm.
as an avid reader of the Marshall Memo, to hear his story on how he was plagued with doing those summarizations in his school.
Yes.
Which they weren't called summarizations. They had a fancy name. To think that turned into his part of his body of work that he does.
Yeah.
It was kind of amazing for me. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, same. His early experiences trained his mind, because he did those summaries to do the memo. Yeah, and his whole thing about being in a boarding school and his dad being in the CIA, just all that kind of stuff just kind of blew my hair back too. And I mentioned, I was thinking about Dr. Anthony Muhammad too, and even his origin story about being compliant and being rewarded for being compliant, but then kind of having a mental or cognitive revolution when he went to college about this is what it's really supposed to be like. I had been rewarded for just following the rules, but that's really not what this is all about. That was really cool for me. Mm-hmm. I thought too, and this is, a kind of on a personal thing, but I've known you and I've known Cedric and I've known Dr. Nikki Woodson for, a little while before the podcast, but it was really nice to connect with you all on the podcast and talk about education and just continue to be just amazed by how everybody's minds work. Sometimes we take our, friendships for granted and, forget man, we need to, it's nice to be able to talk about deep stuff about education as well with good friends. So that's nice too.
We're lucky that our cadre of colleagues is friends, but it's also a set of amazing people.
Yeah, for real.
Amazing educators.
For real. Yeah.
So we did a couple of episodes on psychological safety. Those were very early on.
Yes.
And for our listeners, there were a couple of things that really stood out for me, because I also want to loop in Rosalind Wiseman's episode. And it started with John L. Massey, who was saying that parents need to stay in their shoes. Mm-hmm. And then we had Rosalind reminding us, okay, yes, that is true, but here are some strategies. And if you're a school person or a parent person, go back, listen to those two, because some clear strategies of how to help parents better understand what's going on in school. And then the other thing that Janelle said was the My Bad board. Remember, if everybody only had a My Bad board, like how do we make mistakes? Okay, well, we just put them on public display.
Yeah, we kept, actually, it's interesting because we kept going back to that term. Allison Apsey talked about it. Janelle talked about it. Peter Noonan in the superintendency talked about just like psychological safety and having a culture that allows for risk taking and mistakes. And that's something that, I hope that our listeners go back and really fine tune their antenna for that concept, because it's something that echoed throughout every podcast episode, was just that psychological safety and how important it is to everybody. It's something that I wish that I knew in my first principalship, just about being able to make mistakes and reaching out and asking for help. And it's okay to ask for help. It's not a big deal. So yeah, I was thinking about like the family and community engagement face with Dr. Marrero and Nino. And it was just, I tell you, like, that's the other thing with talking with such accomplished guests. You really feel like, man, I haven't really done that much. We
need our own My Bad board for the podcast.
Oh my gosh. When you're doing some of the preparation for the podcast and you're going through people's biographies, it's really inspiring in two ways. One is that, they're very accomplished people, but they haven't rested on their laurels. They're not complacent. They're not, like, okay, now I'm just going to hit cruise control. They're continuing to evolve, like Dr. Marrero in particular, like continuing to get involved with the community and do the hard work that some people just, put lip service to, about, talking with families and putting out that important data. Anyways, I just was really, so yeah, if you haven't listened to the FACE one about family and community engagement, you have to. It was so super good. Plus, kind of an embarrassing moment, like to go into the funniest moments. Any funniest moments? I'll start with one. Do you have any funniest moments? My funniest moment, or kind of embarrassing one, was I had trouble pronouncing some names. I really tried. But there were some moments where I was like, "Oh, I'm going to mess this up." Anything else that's a funny moment for you, Dr. Ann?
Well, it hasn't happened yet. It's in one of our upcoming episodes, and it's just because I know the person personally. A spoiler alert for everyone who's listening.
Oh, okay.
When Jen Schwanke was talking about her blueberries.
Oh, okay. Yes, right. She did say one of her favorite food is blueberries.
And it's also funny because there are a number of CLS people that love their blueberries as well. Lisa Almeida, the CEO who we listen to, blueberry lover.
Okay.
So it's kind of funny when I know Jen, so it just made it funnier to me.
Yeah.
And then I think if I had to pinpoint another, Josh Tovar.
Oh my gosh.
And he's just like, I'm going to keep it real. And then.
Oh yeah, he did. I put him down too. Like both funny moment as well as like inspiring moment.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was him when he was just honest about talking about his high school career and how he would, go somewhere else to maybe have a couple of beers either before school or something like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like
he had his own house, just chilling, doing what he wanted.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, his story was super cool. I think just from like a technical standpoint, not to get into the weeds with our audience, but like, peeling back the curtains on the podcast is kind of what this show's about, this one right now. And so like our dogs, our dogs have been a part of the podcast in more than one way, So I know Ann, yours has been a vocal participant in the podcast.
She has things to say. She wants to contribute.
And my dog Cookie, she lingers around when the podcast is happening and kind of looks at me impatiently. Has not been as vocal, but I'm recording this. Those of you, we don't do it obviously visually, but this is like in the basement of my house, and so like there's a sump pump that runs occasionally, and I can't turn it off because it's just raining or whatever, and so like that constant noise. Anyways, that's been a hoot from a technical side of things. So
it's getting it across the finish line is not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the polished product that ends up on the other side of things.
So we've had quite a few specific leadership episodes, Drew, and this question is kind of for you. especially for our school leaders out there. And we go on all the way. Most of them are called Fearless Leadership for those who are looking, but some great guests. We've had Rachel George on, who's got her own podcast, Cedric Gray, Jamil Thompson, Peter Noonan, Nikki Woodson, Dr. Reeves on a couple of those.
Yeah.
And as you think about all of those fearless leadership ones, Drew, what has stood out to you as a practitioner? What are huge takeaways?
No, I'm glad you asked that because obviously doing the podcast has been a fun experience, but it also continues to be an educational one for me. And doing the podcast quite selfishly, I thought about, okay, how can this help me with my everyday practice as a principal at the middle school? So yeah, I would say that from a leadership standpoint, like I said, making mistakes is okay, and reaching out for help, it's okay. Go for it. And taking risks is an important practice as an educational leader. Also, knowing where to spend your energy. You know what I mean? Like, because you have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of emotional resource to spend. And then, gosh, there is so much. With Hattie, to go back to him, one is always keeping the data up front and remembering, like, all right, how much of an impact does this intervention or whatever it is, how much of an impact does it really make? Keeping that in the front of my mind. And then also, like, John Hattie could be a total, like, diva, but he's not. You know what I mean? Like, he's a regular dude with a great sense of humor, very personable. So I think that's an important message that wasn't really intended, but, like, no matter where you go, no matter what title you have, no matter what accomplishments you've made, you're still just a regular person in the world trying to figure stuff out, and it's messy. So, and that's something to remember about yourself. And as you work with everybody in your building, whether it's a student, whether it's a parent, whether it's a staff member, like, we're all the same, trying to figure out the same stuff, and nobody's got it 100% right. And the moment that you think you do, and the moment that your britches get too big, that's when you're going to mess up. Mm-hmm. So just remember who you are. I don't know. What do you think?
I think, yes, I completely agree. And I think that's been one of the coolest things of this. That's been all of our guests. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're coming to learn from each other as well. And they're listening to the podcast, and you and I get an email from Dr. Reeves after all of the podcasts that says it's a great podcast today.
Yeah.
And, it's for those of you who are listening, if you didn't know, Dr. Reeves is the author of more than 40 books and well over 100 some odd articles in education. And he loves learning from the podcast.
Yeah, and it's really exciting, someone who could just be like, you don't have to listen to this. I've already written this. I've already talked about this. Like that, he takes the time to listen to it is super cool. And to go back to the listening side of things too, that listening and leadership are really going hand in hand. That you never stop listening. You never stop being curious. That's another lesson that I've just continued to reinforce through the podcast from our guests, is that curiosity and a continual hunger for learning is just something that we just have to continue to foster within ourselves and with everybody that we work with.
So there's two more that I want to talk about, Drew, because there's not always times that I see you speechless.
Oh, so, that is true.
We've had two distinct episodes that I can think of where you're kind of like, well, people can't see it, but you kind of scratch your head and you're like, wow, you're taking down notes. And the first one was our one on alternative education. You were a little lost for words because what Alan and Melissa were saying just kind of they were just kind of blowing your mind. So I'd love to hear your take on that as a person in a comprehensive school.
The alternative education topic is such an important one, and I guess I was flummoxed just because, how do you wrap your hands around that and put it into practice when maybe I was flummoxed because my mind is so into, like, the daily practices of what's going on in my school and a general education school, a quote unquote typical school. Like, all right, so how do we start talking about alternative education? So maybe that's what it is. Obviously I'm kind of flummoxed right now, even talking about it.
Processing that one.
I'm still processing it.
And then our other one, and these are kind of go together, but had Emily Freeland and Miley Tolan on for grading. And I remember they were just saying some things. You're like, my teachers, I need to do this at my school.
Yeah.
The whole idea of grading in general. We had Dr. Reeves on our first one, and then our second one.
Yeah.
People do get stuck with grading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know what I remember. Tell me what you remember.
Yeah, I think with grading, it's just, I think we know in our hearts, we know that we want to do and should be doing what's fair as a practice for all students, right? Like we should be doing what's fair to help students learn and to have a motivation to continue forward, right? So they see that learning isn't just about the numbers, but it's about, becoming better as a person and becoming better as a learner. But what becomes so frustrating when we talk about doing grading better is that there's so many different mechanisms with it. You've got like, okay, so what grading scale are you using? What percentage do you give to this? What percentage do you give to that? What, even down to like, what electronic grade book do you use to make it all happen? Like all of that comes into play, and then teacher sovereignty as well. And, working with, if you have a union involved, like, so all of that becomes part of what I think could become, to use that old adage, can become paralysis by analysis. Like there's so much to think about with it and so much to figure out that sometimes we just do nothing, especially when the school year gets going and you're already at 65 miles per hour. How do you suddenly stop the car and have that critical conversation? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. So for anyone who's like, oh, we're struggling with all those things that Drew just said, go back and listen to those 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about grading, especially at Creative Leadership Solutions, we do not talk about the grade books. We don't talk about average. Actually, Dr. Reeves says don't talk about the average. That's death by the numbers.
Yep.
It's about progress, and it's about where students are. And I remember Maya Elise talking about feedback and walking in classrooms. So it's really, you can go ahead and play around with the percentages in the grade book, but that's not really what grading is about. Grading is about learning.
Yeah.
And grading is about feedback.
Yeah.
So,
and it's interesting that what we do sometimes to students, we as adults wouldn't want to have done onto us.
Absolutely.
When we talk about teacher evaluation, I know that came up a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Teachers want a fair, equitable, and accurate, timely. Give me some good feedback that I can use. Like that's the stuff that adults want to be better at their practice. Are we doing that for students that we're serving at the same time?
Right. And then as our leaders, are you doing that for your teachers?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
No, we have to really think about that.
Yeah, no, I think so too.
So I think the last thing that we probably need to talk about, Drew, is the origin story
of
the podcast.
Yeah. Why not?
Right?
Yeah. Yes.
So how did this podcast actually start is the question. And for our listeners, it started with a conversation between a couple of us at Creative Leadership Solutions and Dr. Reeves. Mm-hmm. And for anybody who does or doesn't know Dr. Reeves, the man cannot sit still. There were a number of us sitting around at the table, and we were talking about what are we not doing, and podcasts came up.
Uh-huh.
Then someone had mentioned, well, Dr. Reeves did a podcast. It was really popular.
Right.
And it was the Fearless Schools podcast.
Oh.
And that was his episode. And it just seemed such a natural fit. So then the question became, who's our host? So this is the real origin story. Because there are a couple of us in the background that we host the webinars or MC the webinars, so to speak. And then Drew, you popped into my head.
Oh, that's very kind.
I remember the good old days of when you worked with AMLE and you were all the things tech. So my question for you, Drew, is how has your experience been as the host?
Oh man, I'll tell you what. Well, first of all, I could say that this is a message to all the youngsters out there listening. Never forget a place where maybe you had a skill or an opportunity or I don't know. Anyways, I was a DJ in college, just on the side. It wasn't my major or anything like that, but I worked at the radio station because I loved music. And so I enjoyed 88.7 FM, James Madison University, Anyway, so I had the 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. shift. And the 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift. Yeah, it was pretty rough.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah. But as the podcast host, I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy hearing what makes people tick and kind of, what the story behind their answers, the story behind their work. I keep the notepad beside me to write down what they're saying and to try to make connections and things like that. So as a podcast host, I think what I've learned is, it goes back to that listening, like you said before, like being a really careful listener. And I also list as the host, or as a host, because it's kind of a co-hosted thing, is that it takes a team to get everything done. What people don't know is that, like, obviously, Dr. Ann, not only did you ask me to be a part of it, which I'm eternally grateful for, but like we meet afterwards, we talk beforehand, we schedule things, we get things coordinated. And then from a question side of things, like sometimes I get goofy on my questions, or, I get more fascinated in the origin story and the person. And you're like, hey, let's bring this back to like the educational practice behind, so it's just, I appreciate all that. I also it's important to allow yourself time to learn how to do something, time to mess up and be okay with that, and just to get better, So yeah, that's stuff that I've learned. I don't know. What have you learned?
I think launching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just so it seems like, yeah, we'll do a podcast, and then
right.
It sounds great. That's just people talking to each other. Which, yes, is it that? Absolutely. But there's a lot more logistics behind it than people think that there is. And, one thing that I think has been wonderful for me is collaborating with you. Like, what's the next idea? What makes sense for our listeners?
Right.
What are the key takeaways for our listeners? How do we keep the momentum going when we see that people really like the topic?
Yep.
So I think that's it, and it's reflecting. We think back to our first couple of episodes and how far we've come. And it only gets better from where you start, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's because I'm learning from you as well as our guests, so that's fun for me.
Yeah, like you said, it only gets better the more you do something, as long as you're continuing to be reflective about it. And I think that's that's what we've done as a team, right? Like, so that's really super cool.
And before we close out, I do want to personally thank the team at Creative Leadership Solutions for providing us this platform, so to speak.
Yeah.
And allowing us to just gather voices under the things that are important to Creative Leadership Solutions, but also important to educators across the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And taking a chance. You know what I mean? Like, they could have been safe in their decision about the podcast and be like, no, we don't want to try something new. But no, they, taking a chance on something is what it's all about. Yeah. And I want to thank, obviously, our audience. Like, we wouldn't be in different countries all over the world, including the US, if it weren't for people from those countries actually taking the time to listen in and subscribe. I think it's important to, I want to thank my family. Goodness gracious. Like, they have to know that they can't use the bathroom when we're doing the podcast.
Everything rolls downhill, right, Drew?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Everything rolls downhill, including water and, anyways. So just thanking our families and gosh, my school as well. I don't bring up my school a whole lot for lots of different reasons, but when I'm talking to teachers and I'm talking to my fellow administrators, like, they also inform me about, what's important on the ground level, and then what I can take from the podcast and use it at work anyways, there's a lot of gratitude. Having an attitude of gratitude, that's very important.
I like it.
Yeah.
Being thankful.
Yeah. All right. Well.
All right, listeners, you did it.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, listeners, you did it. Thanks for joining us on this Best of 2025 Fearless Schools podcast reflective episode. Patted ourselves on the back quite a bit, but we're not going to rest on our laurels and be complacent or content, because that's not how educational growth happens. Hey, thank you, Dr. Ann, for this and for every episode that we had in the past, and thank you in advance for every episode going forward. All right.
Stay forward on the bright road ahead.
Oh, that's right. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right.